Well, good morning, Eagles Nest. Thank you for tuning in this morning. We have another excellent online service for you today. Remember that in Christ, you're not alone. Jesus himself in the Gospels, he isn't caught off guard either. He tells us, in this world you will have trouble, but take heart, for I have overcome the world. And he promises to leave a helper with us to help us get through the day-to-day. So be confident today, church, that God is still on his throne, and even when we don't see or feel like it, he's working behind the scenes on your behalf. Let's join the worship team now as we kind of dedicate these next few moments lifting up our voices in praises to him. You're not alone. Enjoy the service.
Good morning. Would you please stand with us? We're in the presence of a living God who gave his son Jesus so that we could be here, not just for the reason, but through that we can be here in his presence, unashamed and confident, and worship our Heavenly Father. Are you guys ready to do that with me this morning? My name is Paul. This is also Paul. And this is Taylor. And I'm downright giddy this morning because I have two of my favorite people to worship with right here in our worship team. Let's go before our Heavenly Father. What is this love that won't relent? Calling out with heaven's breath. Who's reaching wide to save our souls? Only you. What is this grace that makes no sense? That we can never recompense. Who gives us all a second chance? Only you, only you, only you. There is no one like our God. There is no one like our God. There is no other God who can save. There is no one like our God. Who hung the stars upon the night and showed the sun how bright to shine. Who shaped the world within his hands? Only you. Oh, who set the sky above the hills and told the waters to be still? Who spoke to form the universe?
Spirit of the living God, Spirit of the living God, we only want to hear your voice, hanging on every word. Spirit of the living God, Spirit of the living God, we want to know you more and more. We're hanging on every word. Spirit of the living God, Spirit of the living God, we only want to hear your voice. We're hanging on every word. Spirit of the living God, Spirit of the living God, we want to know you more and more. We're hanging on every word. 'Cause when you speak and when you move, when you do what only you can do, it changes us, changes what we see and what we seek. When you come in the room, when you do what only you can do, it changes us, changes what we see, what we see. You're changing everything. Spirit of the living God, Spirit of the living God, we're leaning into all you are. Everything else can wait. Spirit of the living God, Spirit of the living God, come now and breathe upon our hearts. Come now and have your way. 'Cause when you speak and when you move, when you do what only you can do, it changes us, changes what we see and what we seek. When you come in the room, when you do what only you can do, it changes us, changes what we see and what we see. You're changing everything. And when you move on our feet. When you move us to tears. When you move on our fears. When you
Good morning, Eagles Nest. Welcome to all of you who are worshiping with us here in the building and those worshiping with us online. Before we start, I want to share a few thoughts with you about the current state of affairs regarding the coronavirus. I recognize that there are conflicting views about the disease, its spread, and what should be done about it. But here's what I'd like all of you to consider. If you knew, and I stress you knew, that when you walked into a supermarket, mall, restaurant, or even a church, that there was a chance you could get the virus, what would you do? Would you go in? Would you wear gloves? Would you wear a mask? Would you bring a bottle of hand sanitizer? Would you shake hands? Or would you stay at home? As someone deeply concerned with your well-being, I'm asking you that wherever you go, to consider the reality that there is a risk to contracting the virus. And I'm also concerned with the measures being taken that there's a growing sense of false security. Washing our hands, wearing masks, taking temperatures, filling out medical questionnaires, and social distancing might have an effect on the spread of the disease, but they don't remove all the risk. And with those things in mind, I'm asking you to act with intentionality. If you're at risk, worship with us online. If you're uncomfortable with the measures that we are taking or not taking here at the church, please watch online. We have taken certain measures here to keep you safe, but we cannot, and I stress, we cannot guarantee your safety. No one can. So please act accordingly. I thank you for that. When I was a senior in high school, many years ago, my English teacher took us to see the play Macbeth, the movie version. Man, I thought I was going to be bored, but I really wasn't. I enjoyed it. It was actually fun, and it was certainly a lot better than being in class. But here's the thing. Even though we read the play in class before the movie, I didn't get it. I mean, I got the basic plot of it, I get the basic idea of it, enough to pass the test, but it really didn't make a lot of sense to me, and I certainly didn't fall in love with Shakespeare. And those guys, they dressed funny, and they talk funny. Double, double, toil and trouble, fire burn and cauldron bubble. Sounds like my son Kyle's favorite movie when he was a kid, Air Bud, Double Trouble. For those of you with small boy kids, you remember that movie. False face must hide what false heart doth know. Man, that dog just doesn't hunt for me. Fair is foul and foul is fair. Hover through fog and filthy air. Sounds like a commercial for air filters. Sorry, I'm just not feeling it. But that's how a lot of people feel about the book of Revelation. They've read it. They've seen the movie Left Behind. They got the t-shirt, but they just don't get it, and they certainly haven't fallen in love with it. In fact, they avoid it. In fact, I remember John Calvin. He wrote commentaries on every book of the Bible except Revelation. That tells you a lot right there. We've been in a series called Not Alone, and we've been getting advice from the book of Revelation on how to thrive in a worldwide crisis. And so far, we've seen that Revelation is a manual for getting through a worldwide crisis, and that it tells us that we're not alone in the dark. Today, we're going to learn another valuable lesson from the book of Revelation, and it starts with understanding that it's like a play. If you think of the book of Revelation like a play, you get a lot more out of it. Now, for the guys in the audience, I know that when we start talking about plays, they kind of get sleepy. So don't fall asleep on me, guys, because we're going to, in just a few minutes, we're going to talk about football. So stay awake. But think about Revelation as a play. Plays, they have a plot. Revelation has a plot. The plot is the way that the story unfolds. The best way to think of the plot is to think of football, guys. Football. All the guys just woke up. Football games unfold in a certain way. In fact, football games, they actually have 4 stages. First is the pregame show. That's when you get your potato chips and your ice cream and your iced tea and you get all ready for the game and you watch people talk about the game that's coming. In a play, it's called the prologue. The second part of a football game is the game itself. And we know that there's 4 quarters. And in a play, the 4 quarters are called acts. There's different acts in a play. And the third stage of a game is that the game goes back and forth between offense and defense. Now, in a play, it goes back and forth as well in something called scenes. So you have a prologue, you have the acts, you have the scenes. And the fourth part of a football game is the post-game show. And in a play, that's called the epilogue. The book of Revelation has a plot. It unfolds in a certain way, and it's similar to a football game. The pregame in the book of Revelation is called the prologue, which is found in Revelation chapter 1, verses 1 through 9. John introduces himself, tells us that he's exiled on the island of Patmos, where he receives the vision of the resurrected Christ and the book of Revelation. But the book of Revelation also has 4 quarters, 4 acts, and we looked at those last week when we looked at its 4 visions found in Revelation chapter 1, verse 10 through chapter 22, verse 5. We looked at those last week, and so if you didn't have a chance to see that, you want to go back on our website and take a look, or Facebook, and look at those. So we have the 4 visions, the 4 acts. But Revelation also he also goes back and forth, just like a football game. But in Revelation, it goes back and forth, not on offense and defense, but from heaven to earth. And this is why it kind of gets confusing, because you have to remember where you are. And a lot of people lose it right here when they're reading the book, because they don't know if are they in heaven, on earth. And so when you start taking note of that, the book actually begins to clear up. Now, in my studies, I've identified 4 acts or 4 visions and 28 scenes. There's 28 different ways it goes back and forth between heaven and earth, and I'm going to give that to you on our website so that you can see them laid out for those who want to study it more further. And there's a 4th section of the book of Revelation, which we call the post-game show, or the prologue, and it's found in Revelation chapter 22, verses 6 through 21. Again, I'm going to lay them out for you, and they'll be provided for you at the end of the service. I don't want to get lost in the detail. What I do want you to realize this morning is that, like a play, the book of Revelation has a plot. It unfolds in a particular way. The second way that the book of Revelation is like a play is that it tells a story. Revelation has a story. Christopher Booker writes in his book, The 7 Basic Plots, which, by the way, is a really long book of 700 pages. But it's ironic because in his 700 pages, he's explaining that all stories basically have one of 7 different basic plots. And so he gets very wordy to say something very simple. He must be a preacher. But on a couple pages, he says this. He said, at any given moment, all over the world, hundreds of millions of people will be engaged what is one of the most familiar of all forms of human activity. In one way or another, they will all have their attention focused on one of those strange sequences of mental images which we call a story. We spend a phenomenal amount of our lives following stories, telling stories, listening to stories, reading stories, watching stories, and watching them being acted on TV and in film and on the stage. They are far and away, he says, one of the most important features of our everyday existence. Stories are central to our lives, and the book of Revelation is telling a story. Plays tell a story. Stories are not only important, they're a universal feature of human existence. Every human being from every nation, from all time, and in all places have told and listened to stories. Which of us have not read stories to our kids, to our grandkids, nieces and nephews, or the children of friends of ours? We've all told stories. Which of us have not told stories around the campfire? You remember the stories about bloody fingers and different things like that on the campfire when you camped? Which of us have not told stories about the great giant fish that got away? We all tell stories. If this was a Geico commercial, they would say it like this. We tell stories. It's what we do. Stories are universal to us. Stories move us in ways that facts never could. They move us because they tap into our emotions. Years ago, I used to tell my 2 boys, Kyle and Caleb, when they were little, 3, 4, 5, 6, and maybe up to 7, every night when I put them to bed, I would tell them Zynga Zynga stories. These were made-up stories that I made up myself about going into the woods and finding a certain tree. And on that certain tree, and I would describe the bark, and I'd describe the woods, and I'd go through the story. But on the tree, at the top, there was a fruit that looked like, and it was shaped like a football. But inside that football-shaped fruit were M&Ms. And so every night when I put my kids to bed, they'd ask me, Dad, tell me a Zynga Zynga story. Tell us another one. And so I'd go through it's the same basic story, but I'd change things up. And we did that for years. Now, years later, when my oldest son Kyle went to college, he had to write a children's story for a class that he was taking. And he decided to write a story about the Zynga Zyngas. Unbeknown to me, he had to not only write the story, he had to illustrate the story and put it in a book. And so that Christmas, He gave me that book as one of my Christmas presents. And folks, I'm telling you, I had to hold back from crying like a baby. Why? Because it tapped into all these emotions of telling stories and laying in bed and the kids laughing and giggling. And I'd tickle them. I'd describe the fruit, and then I described getting the M&Ms. It was great. In fact, now my grandson, Jason, if you ask him what a Zinga Zinga is, he'll tell you what it is. He likes Zinga Zinga stories himself. That's my grandson. But I want you to notice they tapped into our emotion. Even when I was an older man, just talking about it tapped into my emotion. Stories move us. Stories, not only are they universal, not only do they move us, they connect a series of seemingly uninvolved images or events. That's what stories do. They bring these mental images and experiences together. These images could be communicated in writing or in drama, body language, or any other kind of form of communication. But stories are a series of word pictures that are brought together in a certain order that tell an overarching or big story. Now, no doubt that when people read the book of Revelation, they have a hard time understanding it because the images that are in it are strange to us. But in fact, the imagery used here in Revelation actually comes together in story form. There is actually an underlying or overarching story that brings all these images that we read in Revelation together. Now, the reason why it's hard for us to connect these dots is we're not familiar with the overarching story, which is temple worship. Temple worship brings all these images together. In fact, there is a reference to the temple, either in heaven or on earth, in almost every chapter of the book of Revelation except a couple. And so when we see these images isolated from each other, we kind of lose sight of the overarching story. And the overarching story, however, is worship. And so when we begin to read the book of Revelation from the story of worship, it begins to bring some of these images together and it begins to tell us a story. Jack Hayford writes that worship is the core value of the book of Revelation. He says whatever else is made of its prophetic pictures or images, he says it's about worship. No book of the Bible has had more written about them than this one. In other words, people have written about the book of Revelation ad nauseum. But little to notice has been made regarding the way it is laced through with scenes of worship, according to Jack Hayford, and I agree with him. He said, beside and quite frankly preceding this book's place as a manual on last things, Revelation is a book of intensely practical, not speculative value. And its foundation is in the uniqueness as a source of understanding worship. Worship, my friends, is the overarching story of the book of Revelation. And its plot, how it unfolds, is it unfolds like a heavenly temple worship service. I cover this in my book, The Book of Revelation, the Heavenly Worship Service, in more detail, but that's really how it unfolds. And why Revelation is so confusing to us and why its plot seems to escape us is that we're just not familiar with this imagery and how it all connects together. But when you begin to see how it flows from one thing to another and you compare it to temple worship, it really actually begins to make sense. Now, we're not familiar with temple worship, but we are familiar with stories. And we're familiar with the fact that when we were in grade school, we had to learn to write stories. And how do you learn to write a story? You have to have a beginning, you have to have a middle, and you have to have an end. And what's really intriguing is temple worship, which took place in the city of Jerusalem twice a day in the temple there, has a clear beginning. Temple worship had a clear middle, and worship in the temple had a clear ending. And we see those in the book of Revelation. In the temple of Jerusalem, worship began with the blowing of silver trumpets. Revelation begins with the blowing of the trumpet voice of Jesus. It says in Revelation 1:10, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, and I heard behind me a loud voice like a trumpet. This is a definite connection to temple worship. The worship service in the book of Revelation began with the blowing of the trumpet, but it was Jesus that was blowing this trumpet. There was a clear middle in the worship service which took place in the temple of Jerusalem. The middle of the worship service was marked by the burning of incense on the golden altar, which was right before the veil of the holy place. Guess what? Worship in the book of Revelation is marked by the burning of incense Revelation 8:3 says, "Then another angel, having a golden censer, came and stood at the altar, that he should offer it with the prayers of all the saints upon the golden altar, which was before the throne." And in the temple worship service, there was a clear ending. In fact, the ending is really, really clear in temple worship. And guess what? It's really clear in the book of Revelation. In Revelation chapter 15, 2 through 3, we get to see the same thing in the heavenly worship service as took place in the earthly worship service. The end of a worship service in the temple was marked by singing and pouring out a drink offering of wine from a series of bowls, and that's what we see in the book of Revelation. And this is why I'm trying to help you to see. We're not familiar with worship in the temple, but we are familiar with how stories unfold, and the stories that it's unfolding here is that of worship. God's people are worshiping Him, and there is a beginning, there is a middle, and there is an end. And the end of the earthly worship service and the end of the heavenly worship service are the same. We read it in Revelation chapter 15, verse 2, and Revelation chapter 15, verse 7. It says, "And I saw something like a sea of glass mingled with fire. And those who have victory over the beast, over his image, and over his mark, and over the number of his name, standing on the sea of glass, having the harps of God." This is for music. "They sing the song of Moses." The song of Moses was sung in the temple on Sabbath. That's a whole nother sermon altogether. But that's how the service ended. And at the same time, simultaneous with the singing in the temple, a drink offering of wine was poured out. These were happening at the same time, which is referred to in Revelation chapter 15, 7. It says, "Then one of the four living creatures gave the seven angels 7 golden bowls full of the wrath of God who lives forever and ever." This is clear temple imagery. John is letting us know that the heavenly worship service is coming to a conclusion. There is a beginning, there is a middle, and there is an end. Now lastly, stories focus our attention. According to the book Attention Economy, attention is the new currency. And we have to admit, there's a lot of truth there. It has never been harder to get people's attention than it is today. We're all so busy and distracted. But there's no better way to get people's attention than through story. Stories bring us in. They not only move us, they're not only universal, and they not only have a beginning, middle, and end. They focus our attention. And that's what the book of Revelation is doing. These people that the book of Revelation was written to were about to go through a worldwide crisis. And so Jesus sends them a message called the book of Revelation to focus their attention and to communicate certain things that they need to understand in order to get through that crisis. So like a play, Revelation has a plot. It unfolds in a certain way, and that plot is organized, or it unfolds like a temple worship service, and there is a story, and the story is the worship of God's people before they go through this crisis, and even as they go through this crisis. Worship is the story the book of Revelation is telling. And there's a third way the book of Revelation is like a play. Plays have a theme. Revelation has a theme. The theme is the main point. It's the main message or the moral of the story. For the guys out there, they're not much into plays. I understand it, because I would much rather watch football than go to a play. But in football terminology, the theme is the win. They play football to win. Well, most teams play football to win. Then there's the Cowboys. I'm not sure why they play football. But most teams are playing to win. That's what it's about. The book of Revelation has a theme. There's a moral to the story. There's something that God is saying to them and to us for these people about to go through a worldwide crisis. And one of the things that helps us, folks, get through any crisis, whether it's individual or whether it's worldwide, whether it's local or whether it's nationwide, is to define the win. Defining the win gives clarity. The win becomes like the North Star guiding us when we can't get any other direction. The win helps us orient ourselves, even when all other landmarks of our lives are destroyed. And folks, let's face it, with all that's going on, all the new realities that we're dealing with, there's a lot of points of references that have been lost in our lives. And so defining the win can calm us down. It can give us direction and clarity. It can help diminish anxiety and can actually help us navigate through crisis, whether it's individual or whether it's worldwide. Consider what happened when the coronavirus hit. our leaders came out and they defined the win. Does anyone remember what it was? The win was to flatten the curve and to make sure that our hospitals were not overrun. Now, once we flattened the curve and hospitals were not being overrun, most of our leaders began to move the goalpost. And I'm not saying here, I'm not picking on any leaders here, but I'm just saying what's happening to us to some degree in our country is now we're all trying to redefine the win. And it's creating division and confusion in us because we don't have a clear win anymore. This guy says this guy says that. For some, the win is wearing a mask. For some, the win is not wearing a mask. For some, the win is eliminating the disease, the virus. For others, it's getting a vaccine. For some, it's getting the economy going. And for others, it's sheltering in place or social distancing. And what's happening to us is we're all kind of fragmenting on shooting for a new win. We're trying to figure out what a new win is or the goal is. And it's kind of dividing us. And I don't think I have to make that case. The book of Revelation, however, gives us a win. It defines the win for all of us in every crisis of our lives. And that's what I want to speak about before we close. There is a win in the book of Revelation. There's a moral to the story. You remember when you were a kid reading stories like The Tortoise and the Hare? There was a moral to that story. There's a main point. And for the tortoise and the hare, the main point is that you can go out of the gate and do things fine or fast, but if you're not careful, you can, like the hare, you can end up losing the game. But if you plug along and just do things consistently and you're prudent and you're wise, you can win the race. And so there was a moral to that story, and there is a theme. There is a moral to the book of Revelation. There is a point that God is trying to make to us. And the win in the book of Revelation is found in several places. Just looking at the letters to the 7 churches gives us some wins or clarifies the win. When he talks about the 7 churches, if you just go there in Revelation chapter 2 and 3, winning is loving one another while fighting the crisis. Revelation 2:5. Winning is being faithful to Christ even if it means hardship or death in the midst of a crisis. That's a hard word. Revelation 2:10. Winning is not compromising with evil in Revelation 2:14. Winning is not promoting evil in Revelation 2:20. Winning is not playing church in Revelation 3:1. Winning is doing what we can in Revelation 3:8. Winning is staying on fire for Christ in the midst of everything, Revelation 3:15. The point, the moral of the story, the win in Revelation is this: worship God. No matter what happens, folks, no matter how bad things get or how good things get, worship God. Regardless of whether or not people respond to the virus the way we do, worship God. Love one another. No matter who wins the coming election, and folks, we haven't even got the election season yet, worship God. Love one another. Regardless of whether or not our leaders make the right decisions about school, which is going to be the next big thing that's coming for us, that will tempt us to fragment and begin to argue and divide. Worship God and love one another. That's the win in the book of Revelation. And that's what the real crisis is about right now. Who or what we will worship, and whether or not we will come out of this as we the people, or whether we come out of this I the people. The moral of the story of Revelation is worship God, which always includes loving one another. The book ends with these words in Revelation chapter 22, verses 8 through 9. Now I, John, saw and heard these things. And when I heard and I saw, I fell down in worship before the feet of the angel who showed me these things. Then he said to me, see that you not do that, for I am your fellow servant and of your brethren the prophets, and of those who keep the words of this book. Worship God. Worship God. At the end of this message, I may not have changed your mind about Macbeth or Revelation. You still might not like plays. Now, guys, you still like football. The images in Revelation may still seem weird, and the language may still seem funny, just like Macbeth still does to me. The plot might be fuzzy to you, like you might not understand how it unfolds like a worship service. That's okay. The story might still be a little hazy. Just don't miss the main point. Make sure you get the theme. Make sure you get the advice that the book of Revelation is giving to us, no matter where we stand on various things. When you go through a worldwide crisis, worship God, not the crisis. Worship God, not the government. Worship God and not our opinion or how the crisis should be handled. Worship God. And I'd add to that, love one another. Folks, if we worship God and we love one another, we can get through anything that's coming. And that's the point that the book of Revelation is making to us. We can get through this. We are going to get through this. And I know this because it says in Matthew 6:33, Jesus himself speaking. The letters are in red. That means Jesus is speaking. Jesus says, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. That means doing what he wants, worshiping God and loving one another. That's what righteousness is all about. And all these things, and the things he's talking about is everything we have need of. All the things we have need of will be added to you. Worship God. Love one another. Let's help each other. Let's stay united. Let's stay we, not focusing on I. Next week, we're going to look at why we respond differently to various things and even a crisis. But for now, we're going to end with a song of worship, and then Pastor Jay is going to come up and share what's happening here at the Nest. May God bless you. We'll see you next week. Let's worship together.
Working in this place, I worship you, God. I worship you, 'cause you are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are here, touching every heart. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, healing every heart. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, turning lives around. I worship you. I worship you. stop working. Never stop, you never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop, you never stop. You never stop, never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop, you never stop working. Oh, even when I don't see it, no. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop, you never stop working. You never stop, oh. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you Jesus, you are Waymaker. I'm out of breath, but I want to share something with you. God is so good. And He is still on the throne. Amen. I'm going to share something real quick. So, like probably every one of you, for the last many months, all I keep saying is why? Why, God? Why? I didn't get an answer. I wish I would get an answer. I'd probably be on my face though, ready to die if I got an answer, so maybe I don't want an answer. But just in the last week or two, something has hit me really hard. That I've been saying, why? And it was as if God said to me, where you been? I'm still on the throne. I'm still in control. That is who I am. I'm still in control. That's what He's saying to me. Where have you been? Because during this whole time of saying why, I've been a real slacker with my prayer life, my Bible study, my fellowship. And that's not what God wants us to do. So I can only speak for me, but one thing maybe coming out of this crazy time in our life is, one thing it's done for me is brought me closer. Especially when you have great accountability people in your life like this man right here, who says, hey, what are you doing? You walking a straight line? Are you doing this? Yeah, I was doing this. And it's just hit me when God says, where have you been? I'm still here. And like the song says, even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. He is in control. Don't let anyone tell you He's not. He is in control. He's not putting you through it, He's getting you through it. That's all I can tell you, okay? You never stop working. You never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop. Sing it out, folks. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. No, you never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop. Oh, you are who you are, because that is who you are. That is who you are. That is
To be or not to be? That is the question. That's how we do it in Shakespeare land. I'm quoting Hamlet. He was quoting, I can't even say the name. You're not supposed to say the name Macbeth. In real words, you have to use the Scottish accent. And I'm not going to do that today. So let's move on. You know, he talked in all seriousness about defining the when and what that theme or main point of Revelation might be. And I have something that's applicable to, I think, all of us. If I have this in this COVID-19 environment, is it my family? Is it my personal time? Is it my health that I can be thankful for? Then I can decide to be rich. Everything else can fall away, but I have the main thing in my hand. And I think that applies to us here in this church. And one of the things that I've been so proud of this congregation is that we have a community of people that have or may have polar opposite viewpoints on one side of how to handle it or not, but yet we can come in this place as a community and worship our God collectively together. And so I'm proud of you for that, and it's a joy to see and observe from my perspective. Let's extend grace to one another on the daily, and now let's get to the announcements. So one of the things that I'd like to keep in front of all of us is the concept of back to school. I know parents, I don't have to remind you of it, but we're supposed to hear something in the next week or so from our state on where we're going to land as a state. And so we would really covet hearing from our parents on kind of what your situation is and what your setup's going to be, and at least your game plan for the fall. We can't make any promises at this point, but we want to learn what is it that you need so that you can pull off the school year in whatever COVID environment we're going to be living in. So send us an email at hello@eaglesnest.ch, and we would love to hear from you. Give us as much detail as you can. What school does your son or daughter go to? And what do you think the pitfalls or the gaps may be, so that we can begin to put together a game plan to help you out. I also want to talk about marriage night. It's coming up September 18th, Friday night. But ladies, I'm going to need you to turn away from the screen and plug your ears. Guys, lean in a little bit. This is your chance. Do not mess this up. You're going to win some bonus points, and you can't tell your wives. Think about it. What says I love you more than an evening dedicated to improving or laughing about our marriage relationship? I mean, you got to invest in that, guys. You couldn't do life without her, and you know it. So let's get a date night together. We're going to spare no expense. Gourmet Chick-fil-A. We're going to have the banquet room set up, possibly romantically, right? Come on, guys, get with me. And we're even going to be able to keep all of your creepy kids if you sign up in the back. So guys, here's what I want you to do. Go to Realm, sign up, you do it for her, and then come to her and say, hey, I have a date night plan. Would you like to go with me? We'll provide the comedy, we'll provide the content, we'll provide the food, and we can all do it together. It's a win-win for you and her, right? Let's do it together. I'll see you there. Earlier this week, we had our first ever online campus meeting, and our goal there was to kind of coordinate our ever-growing efforts to do more for you throughout all of our online platforms. We continue to appreciate all of the support that you're giving us, our church family, through all the different mediums, our website, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and of course, Realm. All of it is designed to get the gospel message out, to connect one another, and continue to do life together in an online environment. So we ask you to continue to follow us, like us, share our content with others, and we will be right there with you on the daily. God has been faithful through you. So if you'd like to continue to give, go to eaglesnest.ch, click the little give button in the top of the corner, and find Realm or PushPay, both safe and secure platforms that you can give online, or you can show up here right at 9:30 and drop it in the baskets as you leave. You can also use snail mail. So we appreciate all of that. Now, for all of my friends that are feeling alone, that is not a joke. That is a serious thing that even I've struggled with at different facets of my life. Depression, anxieties, not knowing where the next thing's going to come from. Even when you have people all around you, the truth is you can feel isolated and alone. And so we would love the opportunity to discuss with you your relationship with God and how you can have a personal relationship with Him. We can even give you a small pamphlet of information that shares in a very simple and succinct way the message of the cross. send us an email as well at hello@eaglesnest.ch today, and one of the pastoral staff will reach out and pray with you. We thank you for all you do, Eagles Nest. Continue to worship, connect, and serve together. We'll see you next week.